Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's good to be here on this weekly appointed time. It's good to be here and to be able to share with all of you. Big welcome, whether you're here on the live stream right now, whether you're catching up on the internet, whether it be on YouTube or Rumble. A big Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Welcome to the river. Today, part 5 of 1 Timothy. What is that today is the penultimate part. So we've got today's session and we've got one more teaching next week where we'll address chapter 6 of this wonderful book of 1 Timothy. And man, what a journey this has been, revisiting what we thought we knew, relaying all the groundwork. And so I pray that this has been a blessing to all of you out there. I know that for some of you who have been reaching out, and being very grateful for going over this very important message, really, that the Apostle Paul would give to the early assemblies as to how we are to act as a body. I hope people are realizing that the instructions given to us by the Apostle Paul, and even in the Torah, we're not to view these things as a list of do's and don'ts, but, that these instructions are given to us for our benefit. It says in scripture that Elohim is love. And we know that whatever comes forth from our mouths is from the overflow of our heart. And so every word that Elohim spoke, not only directly, but also through his servants, such as the prophets and the apostles, they're an overflowing from his heart. And if Elohim is love, that means everything he says is love. And with love comes instruction. And so these instructions are actually given to us because our King loves us. He wants the best for us. And so, one of the things that I've had the privilege of seeing is as our community really starts to implement these instructions that have been given to us in this book we call the Bible, I see the fruit. I start to understand why Elohim would say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It's not that he's being capricious or that he's wanting to give us a list of do's and don'ts, but he actually wants what's best for us. And that if we can really begin to make these instructions living in our lives, I don't know about you, but who here is noticing the fruit in their lives from actually applying these principles and these instructions and applying them in a very real and practical way, as opposed to them being just head knowledge? Today's teaching, I've entitled it Working as a Body, because really this is what the whole book of 1 Timothy is about. How can the body operate in a functional way, in a way that brings good fruit and not bad fruit? As always, let's quickly recap on what we did. And just before we hit the recap, I can say that today should be a shorter teaching. I know as we've gone through the series, the teachings have got longer and longer and longer. I can say today that it's going to be, a normal length teaching, whatever normal means. And so, today's not going to be as grueling, if I can use that term. But in part 4 last week, we looked at how false teachers warned of in scripture, these doctrines of demons, this misleading spirits, the people that would bring these things about, they actually put a very strong emphasis on the outside of the cup. So the outwardly demonstration of things, on the flesh and on emotions. So everything they demonstrate, it looks good on the outside, but actually there's no real tangible fruit of the faith, the peace, the love, the unity, the good fruit that would manifest in one's life. And, many of us have come from these religious backgrounds where there's a lot of emphasis on do this, don't do that, but yet not actually addressing the heart of the matter, which, pardon the pun, is the heart, our characters. as I said earlier in the introduction, what flows out of through our lips is actually an indication of what goes on in the heart. And so one thing you will find is you can see people that have an outward expression that looks great, but actually inside there's not a whole lot going on. But if we focus on the heart matters, if we focus on peace, love, and the outcome of that being unity, do not be surprised that the outside of the cup starts to be cleaned out as well as an outcome. And really, maybe I should have made this a little bit clearer last week, but where we go wrong is when we focus only on the outside of the cup. When we make the outside of the cup the pursuit, we start to fall into trouble, because what happens, we do this at the expense of our hearts. Whereas if we focus on the inside of the cup, the outcome of that will be that the outside of the cup will become clean, as it were. And this is why Yeshua would say what he says, to the Pharisees, hypocrites, you focus on the outside of the cup, but you've missed out the weightier matters, the love, the mercy, the long suffering. He says, first clean the inside so that the outside becomes clean too. And this is, again, we say this ad nauseum in the teachings. What is the pursuit and what is the outcome? If our pursuit is Messiah and being Messiah-like, wonder no more if the outside starts to manifest as well what's truly going on the inside. These false teachers, they will use the quote-unquote supernatural as a form of authority. So as the Apostle Paul said, they'll go on about visions and, these super visions and dreams. So people will say, well, I had this supernatural experience, and they'll use that as their form of authority as to why you should listen to them. And what they will then do is use their own subjective emotions, or even the other party's subjective emotions, as validation for said authority. One of the ways that this manifests in our modern world is that people will go, well, I had a vision, I had a dream, I went to heaven, I went to hell. And then they'll say things like, well, do you not feel it in your spirit? And if you've been trained or programmed to view reality through your emotions, that means that when you feel your emotions, you go, oh, they must be right. And actually, it's all focusing on the flesh, because our emotions, they're kind of like an indicator of what goes on in our heart, but they're demonstrated through our flesh, our actions, our physical being, as it were. And so the Apostle Paul warns us, be careful of those that will use the supernatural as a form of authority and then using emotions to validate this so-called authority. This should hearken back actually to the Deuteronomy 13 test that, Yah will allow false prophets in our midst, and some of their signs and wonders may actually come to pass. But what is it that is actually the litmus test for whether they're a true prophet or not? Ultimately does it stack up against the whole word? The Torah, the prophets, the writings, and also the revelation of these things, what we would call the New Testament. The traditions of men will take us away from the simplicity that is found in Messiah and turn us into hypocrites. We saw this with Judah back in the first century, right? They'd put all this focus on their traditions and, again, these outward appearances, like you replace what's found in the word with that which is of men. And this is where it can lead us to hypocrisy, because we will praise him with our lips, but we will keep our hearts far from him. And again, nothing new under the sun here. This shows up on the Judah bank. This shows up on the Christian bank. It shows up on every other bank that's out there. And so our encouragement to the community and to those watching is, let's stay biblical. Let's stay biblical and let that be the foundation that we focus on, because it's his truth that will set us free. And Yeshua said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And when we are biblical as a people and we implement the biblical pattern in a very real and tangible way, do not be surprised that life starts to come, that joy starts to come, that freedom starts to come. All of these, i.e. the traditions, things of men, they actually feed self and pride. Again, whether it be on the Christian side or the Judeo side, look at academia by and large. I'm painting a broad brushstroke here, but you will find that academia prides itself on its knowledge and its understanding. And while knowledge is not in of itself a bad thing and actually a required thing, right? We need to have knowledge and understanding of the word. Again, has that become the pursuit? Or should we be putting Messiah as the pursuit, and so grow in him, and the outcome of that will be a deeper understanding and knowledge of his truth and his ways? I've put here that lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. You'll actually find that a lot of traditions or religious traditions will actually focus on these things, right? Let's use Christmas as an example, right? Lust of the eyes, all the pretty lights, all the decorations. The lust of the flesh, it's usually, a time for consumerism and gluttony and drunkenness, right? So there's that. The pride of life that comes, wow, look at how amazing our celebrations were. But then this can manifest equally as much on the Judeo front, especially when you get into the physical Judeo paraphernalia. And while, again, that's not the problem, the issue is when that becomes the pursuit and as using that as a form of trying to make yourself set apart. Look at how amazing all my paraphernalia is, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. And actually, these are the same temptations that were presented to Eve in the garden. Eve saw that the fruit was good for food. She saw that it made one wise. It was pleasing to the eyes. So again, like even in the garden, it was lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. And this is what you will see at the root of every temptation that is presented our way. It will hit at least one of these things, usually multiple ones. Inevitably, it's the little ones that are the main target. And so I think most of us will understand that, we come from one riverbank, we look a little bit deeper into his truth, and then we do a hard swing onto the other riverbank because we don't know any better, right? We're still finding our feet. We're still finding what it means to be the people of Yah. And so when we were little ones, we were more prone to these, swinging hard one way, foregoing one set of traditions only to replace them with another set of traditions. And a lot of us now are learning to get back into the river. And so this is why, as a community, we tend not to indulge ourselves in religious traditions because there are little ones coming. And our job as those that are more mature in the faith is to actually point to Messiah, to his truth, to his ways, and not cause confusion for those that are coming in. Unfortunately, the voice of the bride and the groom will be replaced with the voice of men, the voice of religion, and the voice of Mystery Babylon. And this takes us to the warning given to us in the book of Revelation, specifically chapter 18, verse 23. It says that the body will get to such a place that the light of the lamp will no longer be seen and the voice of the bride and the groom will no longer be heard. And so it beckons the question, what will be heard? And I argue, well, the apostle Paul even states essentially that it will be the voice of men, religion and Mystery Babylon. And these things will appease the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. And then that leads us into a cycle of hypocrisy. Being a good and faithful servant is actually to teach the unadulterated truth. That's what it means to be a good and faithful servant, or at least part of what it means to be a good and faithful servant. Someone that will teach the unadulterated, unmixed truth of the word and of Messiah. Again, this is to uphold the command, you shall not add to the word, and you shall certainly not take away from the word. We saw that the laying on of hands is not this hocus pocus magical ceremony in of itself, that the laying on of hands is an outward demonstration of a discipleship process that is occurring. So much like baptism or physical circumcision, these are an outward demonstration through, dare I say, a ceremony or a rite, R-I-T-E, rite. These are an outward demonstration of something that's actually already going on inside at the heart level. Again, the outside of the cup is demonstrating what's going on the inside of the cup. And this is why we need to be wary of how easily we do this laying on of hands. We need to understand actually that the laying on of hands was primarily done by eldership as well. And that the gift of prophecy was at the heart of this laying on of hands, especially in discerning whether one should lay hands or not. As we saw, is the ability to discern the word. And as by virtue of that, you can discern men's hearts and spiritual undercurrents, thus being able to act accordingly. Prophecy is not the act of foretelling the future. This is what Mystery Babylon has taught us, that a prophet's role is to foretell the future. Actually, a prophet was someone that had such an understanding of the word, like the word was literally written in their heart, but not only did they have the understanding of it, they had the ability to wield it or to rightly divide it. And as a result of that, they were able to discern things according to biblical truth. And who here has found that the more you grow in your faith, the more the word becomes written on your heart and living in your life, that you're able to discern things a lot quicker than what you used to. You're able to start to perceive what's actually going on under the surface. You're starting to be able to see what drives the heart inside the cup, and thus, as a result of that, you're able to understand why you're seeing certain behaviors on the outside of the cup. This is actually part of the prophetic ability being honed. And we saw that this is actually a gift that is worked at, that you grow in as you mature. Due to this, the ability to discern, a prophet can actually be trusted to speak on behalf of Elohim. One of the roles of a prophet was to be a mouthpiece for Elohim. Elohim will give him a message and he will say, go and tell my people. Now, for Elohim to do that for a prophet means that Elohim has to be able to trust said prophet, to not add or to not take away, and especially to not filter the word of Yah through their own emotions, because then you will end up tainting the word of Elohim. And so you see this with all the prophets of the Tanakh. And I've put here Nathaniel and the 144,000. Yeshua said of Nathaniel, here is an Israelite in whose mouth is no guile or falsehood, depending on your translation. He spoke the truth. He spoke it in an unadulterated fashion. And you see that the 144,000 have this same characteristic, that in their mouth was found no falsehood or guile, which means that Elohim can entrust them to speak on his behalf. And so again, the role of prophet is actually a lot more practical than it is ethereal, as we've been taught generally by religion as a whole. Prophets tend to be spoken to in dreams and visions and riddles, which is why they need to have this ability to discern. Because again, we see with the prophets, Yah speaking to Jeremiah, Jeremiah, what do you see? And Jeremiah would reply, I've seen a budding almond branch. And Yah says, you have seen well. And I believe that Jeremiah understood the context of the vision there. You see it in other places, with the prophet Daniel, where Yah has to say, Gabriel, give Daniel understanding, because the vision, the riddle was so obtuse, if you want to call it that. It required huge amount of discernment. We see Daniel reading the prophet Jeremiah and understanding the 70 years are up. How was he able to do that? It's because he had the prophetic ability to discern the word and as a result, act accordingly. This is the bit that's not often taught by the religious body, that a prophet is subject to the prophets, which means that there's authority and accountability for a prophet. A prophet it has to line up with all the prophets that have gone before in the word. It's, found in the Torah, found in the prophets, found in the whole word of scripture. But we see in 1 Corinthians 14 that if a prophet is to speak, all the other prophets are actually to weigh what's being said to see if it is of Yah or not. And unfortunately, in the modern religious world, a prophet is almost like a carte blanche, like to be a law unto yourself. And that's not what the scriptures teach. A prophet will make himself accountable to other prophets, to those that are mature in the word. So let's move on to today, chapter 5 of 1 Timothy. And again, the focus on today is working as a body, working as a body. Verse 1, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Now, the word here for older man is presbytero, and for older women, presbyteras, which is the feminine equivalent. This word, the English word presbyter or the Presbyterians, it's from this Greek word, and it's very much like the English word elder. An elder can mean someone who's aged, but it can also mean an elder within an assembly, within an authority sense. Now, in this particular context of verse 1, this is actually speaking of older people, not elders. The rebuke of elders, because we're going to see this word presbytero used for later on in the chapter, but in that particular context, at the end of the chapter, it's very clear that it's speaking of the elders within an authority structure of an assembly. And to be an elder at an authoritative level is actually less based on age. Here, the context is very clear that this is not speaking of elders in an assembly in the authority sense. It's just speaking of the aged generation, because you can see the contrast between an older man, younger men, older women, younger women. So just so people are aware, that the word presbytero is literally elder. An elder can mean age, it can mean authority. What we're dealing here is the older generation. Now, in the English, do not rebuke, but encourage. You kind of get a rough sense of what that means, but unfortunately, rebuking and encouraging, we filter that through our own modern day English understanding of what these words mean. And the Greek is a little bit more refined, if I can use that word. The word here for rebuke in the Greek is epiplesso, which literally means to strike upon or to beat upon, or to chastise with words, to chide, to upbraid, to rebuke. And so, because here's the thing, you'll read in other places, especially in the Torah, you shall surely rebuke your brother and bear no sin because of him. But here, Paul is saying, do not rebuke. And so if we stick with the English rebuke, we miss the point of what's actually being said. When you understand that the epipleso literally means to strike upon, epi means upon or on, and the pleso is this striking, this hitting. It's essentially saying, do not do violence to an older man. Do not do violence, whether it be physically or with your words, okay? And so rebuke, essentially he's saying, don't cut someone down with your words. There's a way of going about rebuke, right? You can do it in a way that's loving, meek, compassionate, but you're still getting a rebuke in there. Or you can just be a jerk and cut them down with your words. And essentially, this is what Paul is saying. He's saying, don't just cut someone down with your words, right? Encourage them. So what does it mean in the Greek to encourage? The word for encourage is parakaleo, which means to call near, actually, to call someone near, to ask to receive or give help, to implore, to entreat, to urgently ask, to urgently counsel, encourage, or admonish. So we actually see, or to comfort. So we actually see within the Greek parakaleo that there is actually the place for rebuking, for reproof, okay? And so when Paul is saying don't rebuke, but encourage, the best way to understand this is don't just cut someone down with your words in a self-righteous fashion, but rather give them mercy, help them, counsel them, encourage them. You may even need to admonish them, to reprove. And so the essence of what Paul is saying here is, how are you going about something? Because again, we have to understand in the Torah, in Leviticus 17, I think, it says, you shall love your brother as yourself. But then it goes on to say, you shall surely reprove or rebuke your brother and bear no sin because of him. And so I believe Paul is actually hinting at this command here. You are to encourage him. Now, again, parakaleo, to admonish. It means that reproof can come as part of encouragement. And so don't just cut someone down self-righteously. Understand that the older generation, remember the Torah says you shall respect your elders, i.e. the older generation. You shall stand before the gray-headed, it says. And so what Paul is saying is essentially, remember this command in Torah, that you are to love your neighbor as yourself, that you are to respect the elderly. But if an elderly person or even an elderly woman or man needs rebuke, you're to do it in a way that is to implore or entreat them, but that will also admonish them. So essentially, he's saying, don't cut someone down, but don't water it down and be so soft and have the kiddie gloves on that you actually water down the reproof or admonishment that's needed. I hope that makes sense. Verse 3, honor widows who are truly widows. And here we're going to go on to see what Paul means by that. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of Elohim. Now, if you were to read just the English, the widows are to return to their households, you would think that it means to just go back home. And actually, the Greek has this idea of repaying, to return back, to give back to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of Elohim. And so it's saying that we essentially do not neglect the fifth commandment of the 10 words, which is you shall honor your mother and your father. So this is predicate on the fact that a widow is actually able to do that. Because remember, some widows would have been left destitute, others wouldn't have. And so all Paul is saying is, if there's a widow that's able to repay or to give back to her parents, let her do so. Because this is pleasing in the sight of Elohim. Why? Because it's honoring the fifth word of the covenant, which is, you shall honor your mother and father. And I believe that the goal of this command is to strengthen the family unit, the family nucleus. Remember that in the first century, the assemblies were being persecuted by both Judah and Rome. And so more than ever, it was important for the family nucleus to be in lockstep and to be hold together and stand, right? And here we are, almost 2,000 years later, and I would say that this is what we need to focus on, to strengthen our family units, because you're now seeing a society where the family nucleus has been completely attacked through our individualism and sheer disrespect, actually, for our parents, for those that are more aged than us. Now, it also says, let them first show godliness to their own household. Again, what does that even mean, to show godliness to our own households? Because ask a Christian and a Jew what godliness means, and they will give you very different answers. So what is the Greek here actually saying? The Greek here, eusebio, it means to be well reverent, to show devout reverence in attitude, conduct, and deed, whether towards Elohim or whether towards parents or respecting other people. So actually, this is to show reverence to, which means that the fear of Elohim is intertwined in this term. So throughout this whole series, when you've seen me use the word godliness, the word in the Greek is actually to show reverence to. If you do not fear Elohim, the ultimate authority, you will not fear the authorities given to you in the shadow picture, i.e. parents, grandparents, bosses at work, and so forth. But if you do know how to fear those in authority and to show respect, be of no surprise that you'll know what it means to fear Elohim. And so, unfortunately, when you see the breakdown of a family nucleus and children not fearing their parents or grandparents, you're actually seeing that there's no fear of Elohim. There's no reverence. Because if you don't fear Elohim, you won't fear your parents, and vice versa. Okay? And so this is all Paul is saying here. The focus here is to strengthen the family unit and to actually fear Elohim. Because if you truly fear Elohim, you will show respect to those of your own household first. Remember what the authority structure is within the faith. Elohim, spouse, children and, children, family, and so forth, and then everybody else. And so Paul, the goal of this command is to honor the authority structure within the family unit. Let's remember that how we work within the family unit will actually will show how we operate within the family unit of the household of Elohim, right? Remember that a servant leader in the body, if he can't manage his house well, he won't manage the house of Elohim well. And so this is what Paul is essentially saying. Focus on your family unit so that if you can understand it there, you will know how to work as a body. Hence the title of today's teaching, Working as a Body, because we are of the household of Elohim. She who is truly a widow, left alone, has set her hope on Elohim and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. So now we're seeing what Paul means by she who is truly a widow. You've got to remember again, to be a single woman in the ancient world was actually, it was quite dangerous sometimes. And so what Paul is saying here, that she who is truly a widow is she that has no husband, but basically her only hope is Elohim. She doesn't even have physical goods. She doesn't even have money, the way to look after herself. And so Paul is saying you're going to see different types of widows. You're going to see those that are truly destitute and they need to rely on Elohim and by extension, the assembly. But there'll be those that actually physically, they're doing just fine. And this was true in the ancient world, and this is true even now. We see it actually within our community. Now, self-indulgent, the Greek word here, spatalao, it means to live luxuriously, to lead a voluptuous life. And so before you think that Paul is condemning a widow of, say, being rich, that's not what he's actually dealing with. Look, to give oneself to pleasure, to indulge oneself beyond the bounds of propriety. Think hedonistic lifestyle, okay? Excess. Like, the issue is not being rich. The issue is what you do with it. Remember that Abraham, right, Father Abraham, was, by ancient standards, filthy rich. He was like very, very rich, but he was humble, right? Riches and material wealth are not the issue. The issue is, does it become an idol? This is why Yeshua would say, do not store up treasures here on earth where moth and rust do destroy, but rather in heaven, because where your treasures are, there your heart is also. And so we see, Abraham was able to have material wealth and his heart not be in the material wealth. His heart, we read in the book of Hebrews, right, that he was looking for the city that was built without hands. But there are certain people in this fallen world that riches would destroy them. It would actually, this is why we see the verse that the love of money has led many to basically go through many pains, and they do not put Messiah first. So this is what Paul is really dealing with here. He's not saying you can't have material wealth. He's saying, are you being indulgent in it? Are you giving yourself to pleasure? Again, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. Look, think of the modern day prosperity gospel, right? Where people will say that if you're prosperous, well, then you're set apart. Like, that couldn't be further from biblical truth. Having material wealth is just that. You have material wealth. Either you were lucky and you inherited something, or you were wise and you worked hard and now you're reaping the benefit of it. You've been allowed to enjoy the fruit of your toil in the time domain. What Paul is really addressing here is self-indulgency, this putting physical goods above that which is the weightier matter. That's what he's truly addressing. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. Okay, so again, the reason that Paul is saying this is actually as a witness. This can actually have affect our witness. To be without reproach to who is the question to ask. Well, we read in earlier parts of this series, in the early chapters of 1 Timothy, that we actually have to have a good witness to those outside, that a servant leader is to be without reproach, even to those outside. What kind of witness does it give if you have someone living in luxury, being voluptuous, being sensuous, being hedonistic? Like, a Roman would look at that and go, well, you're no different than us. Whereas imagine looking at someone like Abraham, I'll use Abraham as an example, who did have material wealth. What did he do with his material wealth? He blessed others. We see that in the Torah, that he actually blessed others and that he was righteous in the way he conducted business. Okay? And so these things are commanded so that it actually bears a good witness to those outside. Again, think, she who is truly a widow, left alone, has set her hope on Elohim. Who's Elohim using to provide for this widow? We're going to see as we go through this chapter that it's actually the assembly. What kind of witness does that give to those outside? A good witness. This is not about being wealthy. I've put here Lydia, the seller of purple. In the book of Acts, we come across this woman called Lydia who sold purple cloth. You can argue that the purple was blue as well. We don't know whether Lydia had a husband or anything. If the book of Acts makes it seem that she was a single woman. Now, we don't know if she was widowed or anything, but what we can assume is that she was single. If you were a seller of purple back in the ancient times, let's just say it was a very lucrative market. It was a very lucrative market because generally purple and blue cloth was extremely expensive. So we can assume just by Lydia's profession that she would have been very wealthy. And in fact, the book of Acts gives us further insight to this because we know that Lydia she allowed the assembly, the apostles, to use her house as a place to gather. Now think about this. Lydia had a house which was large enough to host an assembly. Even that is telling you she was wealthy, extremely wealthy. And when you understand how Roman business was conducted on a historical front, like you had guilds and you had monopolies on certain markets. For Lydia to be a seller of purple, which again, these clothes were only sold to royalty and to the extremely rich, the upper classes of society, that means she would have been extremely well connected in the higher classes, okay? And so, but yet we see Lydia, despite her wealth, that she is upheld in the book of Acts. And in fact, we see her true heart. She even allowed her house to become a place of assembly. And so again, the reason I'm laboring this is because you will see it doesn't even have to be widows here. It can be anybody in the body, but they actually pride themselves on living this very very basic lifestyle. And they almost take a form of self-righteous position with it. Like, oh, I have nothing. Therefore, I don't have these worldly distractions. And so you can see it being used the other way. You can see riches and wealth being used for good and bad, but you can see the absence of riches being used for good and bad, right? Again, people taking pride on the fact that they have nothing. Like, oh, well, I'm better because I'm not subject to these temptations. It's like, no, there's extreme on both sides. The issue again is the inside of the cup, right? The inside of the cup. But this is an interesting verse. If anyone does not provide for his relatives or for his household, and especially for the members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than the unbeliever. That's a very bold statement. He has denied the faith and is worse than the unbeliever. Again, think of all the Torah commands. You shall honor your father and your mother. Parents, you shall raise your children in their ways. And I'm going to put forward something. The providing for your household is not speaking of just physical bounty or wealth. Parents, on the physical level, are you providing an actual house for, fathers, mothers? Are you actually toiling so that you can provide a safe physical environment for your children? Let's take the provision a deeper level. Are you emotionally nurturing your children? Because look, there's many rich kids out there, right? They've got all the physical wealth, but their parents did not provide for them on the emotional level. And they're all kinds of messed up now. Like, you just look around, right? You get the spoiled rich kid syndrome. Or now let's take it another level deeper. Are you providing for your children on the spiritual level? Are you actually honoring the Shema that we shall raise the children in his ways? You see, there's levels of providing for your household. This is not speaking of just material goods. Think physical, emotional, spiritual. You have parents, you have a tall order asked of you. You need to provide for your children on all these fronts. If not, you're denying the faith. You're denying the faith. And why would you be worse than an unbeliever? Because you ought to know better. You ought to know better. Even an unbeliever understands that you need to provide physically for your household, although that seems to be a dying trait, especially on the emotional level. Before we go there as well, let's remember, I've put here, cursed is the ground for your sake. Why was the ground cursed? It was to help us. The toil was given to us to actually help us with our fallen state. Okay? It's right back to the garden. So if you're not going to toil, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, you're actually denying the very gift that Elohim has given you to refine you and to help you become an overcomer. You actually remember that toil in all its levels was given to us for our sake. It's actually a gift from Elohim. 2 Thessalonians 3, we mentioned this earlier in the series. This is the Apostle Paul speaking to the Thessalonians. He says, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat." So if you're not willing to toil, don't eat. Now think of this on a physical level, right? If you're not going to work, don't be scrounging. You need, remember, the curse of the fall was for our sake. So the context here is eating bread. "For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but are busybodies." So because you're not doing your toil, the outcome of that is that you start to, you're not busy and you become idle and you start being a busybody. And this is where gossip and slander start to manifest themselves. But the word here, idleness, ataktos, is really interesting. It means disorderly and out of ranks. It's actually a usurping position, irregular, inordinate, immoderate pleasures, deviating from the prescribed order or rule. So if you're not willing to work, because remember, what's the curse of the fall? Cursed is the ground for your sake, as for your benefit. You shall eat bread by the sweat of your brow. This is specifically given to the man, right? And so on a physical level, if you're not going to work, don't eat. Yah is read the Proverbs. He's not a rewarder of laziness. He's not a rewarder of laziness. On the contrary. And actually, if you're not willing to do this toil, you're actually deviating from the prescribed order, which is what was given to us back in the garden for our benefit. Look, I'm going to say it, broad brush stroke, very broad brush stroke, but those that tend to be idle and not work, why is it that they start to find depression? They find that they lack self-worth. They've got no pride of self. And I mean that in the positive sense. There is this thing of, you've done something good and you're proud of the work that you've done. I mean it in that sense. That's completely natural, and it's actually baked into the physical order of things. But I've put here, eating of the bread of life. Think the bread of life being the word. Who here has found that if you want to uncover the gems within the word, you have to till the ground. You have to toil in the word, do you not? The deeper you dig, the more gems you find. And so that even on the bread of life aspect, there is this principle is at play. And if you want to go really at a really deep level, think about eating of the tree of life. We know that Yeshua is the bread of life. I believe that I've done this in other teachings, that Messiah is the tree of life. If you're going to eat of the bread of life, of the tree of life, well, what's the order that's being given for us to do that? You're going to do it through toil. Look, this is why in Proverbs it says that the complacency of fools will destroy you, because you're not toiling. It's literally baked into this time domain, and even within the spiritual matters that surround it, that Yah's not a rewarder of laziness. And if you want something good, you're going to have to toil for it. And this is why Paul is saying this, and if you do not toil, you're actually going to end up usurping. And one of the ways that this will manifest itself is idleness and being a busybody, interjecting yourself and interfering into the affairs of others. Like, think of a gossip going in and destroying a family unit. Oh, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing it this way. And it's like, who are you to say that? Show me the fruit of your life. Oh yeah, you're idle. You're busy. You're busybodying everywhere. You don't have the toil. And so this is why Paul would say this. What is the role of a husband? We covered this in earlier parts in the series. The role of a husband is to physically provide for his family, but also to emotionally nurture both his wife and his children. This is actually part of the essence of providing headship. And now think on the spiritual level, husbands, what's your role within the family? Like, you will be held accountable for the scriptural truth and teaching that is given to your wives and to your children. You will be responsible for that. So you best be doing your toil, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, so that you can then provide and nurture for your family. So again, more often than not, I see a man excelling in maybe providing physically, but he's absolutely hopeless at providing emotionally and spiritually. You need all three for a healthy raising of a household. And so this thing of, if you're not going to provide for your household, you're worse than the unbeliever. This is not just speaking of physical. This is speaking of physical, emotional, and spiritual. What is the role of a wife? Because a wife is to also, she's to teach as a more mature woman is to teach the less mature women, and the children is to what is good. And where is she learning what is good? Through her husband. Because the husband's been doing his due diligence. He's been toiling physically, emotionally, spiritually, in getting bread, both the physical bread, but also the bread of life, and ultimately the tree of life. And his toil is now blessing his wife, and in turn, that's blessing the children. The role of a wife is also to nurture the children and her husband. She's to be a safe place for her husband. She's to be a helpmeet. Let's go back to the garden. What is the role of the woman? To be a helpmeet to her husband. Wives, ladies, if you're not being a helpmeet to your husband, you are worse than the unbeliever, and you are denying the faith. I'm not saying it, the scripture's saying it. Husbands, if you're not providing physical bread and the bread of life for your family, you are worse than the unbeliever and denying the faith. I'm sorry. Why? Because the curse of the fall was given for our sake. And if we're going to remember, it's there to help us with our fallen state. It's actually there to help us with our fallen state. So, look, I'm not saying this to condemn. If you're feeling conviction, good. The question is, now what? Rather than fall into self-condemnation, let's be a body and help one another. Okay, you're men, you're struggling in one area or the other. Get in discipleship. Let the other men help you. Women, I'm struggling to be a helpmeet, or I'm struggling to provide for my children. And okay, go ask the more mature, spiritually mature women or the women's eldership. This is not to condemn, but let's be real. This is what the standard is that's being given to us by our Messiah. We are going to fall short. Question is, what are we going to do about it so that we learn to not fall short anymore? Now, such persons we command and encourage in the Master Yeshua Messiah to do their work quietly and to eat their own bread. So, first of all, the word quietly, hesuchia in the Greek, this is the same word that's used that a woman is to learn in quote-unquote silence. It's not to do with silence. We covered this in part 2, I think. This is to use a scripture, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You're not there to be attacking other people. Work out your own stuff. And this is why Paul says, eat your own bread. Don't be eating other people's bread. Again, on the physical level, if you're not going to work, don't be scrounging off other people on a physical level. But on a deeper level, I of my wisdom or my oil. You have to get your own oil. You can share in someone's burden and share in their oil, but look, I can't open your eyes in the word. I can't further your walk in the faith. You have to walk it yourself. I've put here, you can lead a horse to water. I can point you in the general direction, but you've got to do the work physically, emotionally, spiritually. If you're struggling physically, you need to do the work. If you're struggling with your mental and emotions, no one else can just wave their magic wand and fix your personality. You need to do the work. And so it is with the spiritual. You will stand before Messiah, not me, not Curtis, not each other, not before your husband, not before your wife. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so we need to learn to toil physically, emotionally, spiritually. What was the woman's toil? We covered this in part 2. Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. Why did Paul say that? As we covered in part 2, the curse of the fall, there was toil given to the man and there was toil given to the woman, okay? To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain. The word here, itzavon, it means toil, sorrow. I will multiply your toil in childbearing. And in toil, etzev, you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, i.e., there will be, if the husband is not leading, there will be a usurping that naturally occurs, and he shall rule over you. As we saw, the ruling was already in play before the fall. The curse of the fall for the woman was toil in the raising of children and in the raising of the family unit, that toil, pain would come with it, and that now there's a usurping aspect to the fallen state. And to Adam, to the man, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. The Hebrew there, ba'avurecha, it literally means for your sake. The ba'avurecha means that I'm doing this for a desired outcome. So this toil, this pain, again, look, the same word that in pain Adam shall eat of it all the days of his life from the ground. It's the same word that's given to the woman, the toil. Now, if you want a deeper insight as to toil and how it's for your benefit, go watch the Ecclesiastes part 3 that I did on the Olive Branch channel, where we go through the wrestle of good and evil and toil, and that it's actually there for our overcoming. I haven't got time to get into it really deeply here. Go watch the teaching. The woman's role. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good. So again, where is a woman to know what is good? She's to get it from her husband in an ideal situation. And so train the young women to love their husbands and children. This goes back to the curse of the fall, actually, that the woman will raise children in pain, in toil. That toil is for their benefit, just as that men are to, by the sweat of our brow, in toil we shall eat of bread. It's for our benefit. To be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, submissive to their own husbands, so that the word of Elohim may not be reviled. And so I've put here that the more mature women are to help the less mature women how to go about their toil in a healthy biblical manner, which again is to strengthen the family unit. Notice here, it doesn't say that they're to have Bible studies or teachings or sermons. What are the older women to do? To help the younger women go about the toil in a biblical fashion. Let's remember. So if you want to know the essence of discipleship at both the men and the men are to help each other to toil bread, whether that be physical, emotional, or spiritual. The women are to help each other with their toil. And what was their toil given? That you will raise children and families in pain. This is essentially this, Idiot 101 discipleship for men and women. This is why it looks different, because the toil for each is slightly different, and the two come together. Look, all of that was to kind of, going back to the original point, was that we are to provide for our households. Now, there's the household at the family level, but think about the weightier picture of the household of Elohim. Do you think that Paul's words that if we do not provide for our own households, we're worse than the unbeliever and deny the faith? Do you think that that could extend as far as the household of Elohim? I believe so. And so how do we do this as a community? Hence today's teaching title, Working as a Body. Men, help each other with the toil that we've been given. Ladies, help each other with the toil that you've been given, so that husbands and wives can come as a chad, so that we can become a body. Back to the widows. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband. It's interesting that this is, it parallels the requirements for a servant leader and a deacon as well, that they're to be the husband of one wife. And having a reputation for good works. Again, how do you know someone's reputation? You walk with them. You play the long game, as I stated in earlier parts. If she has brought up children and shown hospitality, oh, look at that. Back to the curse of the fall. You will raise children in what? In pain, in toil. This is speaking of a widow who has raised children and overcome. You can actually see the fruit of her labor. Here are her children. What are her children like? Are they of the faith? Do they have good reputations? Do they have good morals and character? Do you see what Paul is saying here? This is not just saying, oh, I've had children, let me serve. The reputation for good works. And then he goes on to say she's brought up children. How did she manage her toil? Because if she didn't manage her toil well, how on earth is she going to help a younger woman in the faith with her toil? If she's shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. Now, look, it says, let a widow be enrolled. Enrolled into what? We read it in Titus just now. What are the older, more mature women to do? To help the less mature women what to do. Right, let's not pull this out of context. And so as this means that what Paul is saying, these widows that are to be enrolled are actually there to help serve at a servant leader capacity. And so just as there's requirements for servants in the body, Paul is just basically reiterating some of these requirements. The wife of one husband, just as a servant leader is the husband of one wife. Having a reputation for good works. Well, this is what the servant leaders in chapter 3 had to go by. If she has brought up children, how did she deal with her toil? Because if you can look at her children and go, wow, she did a good job, you want her on the team. Well, again, this is a direct parallel. What did it say about servant leaders? That they're to manage their households well, having their children in subjection to the faith. Like, again, let's keep chapter 5 within the context of chapters 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. This is one letter. But refuse to enroll younger widows. For when their passions draw them away from Messiah, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going on from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. Now, I've put here, is the issue desiring to marry again? Is that the problem? Because if you read verse 11 in isolation, it would seem so. We're going to go on and read that actually Paul says, let the widows marry. So the issue is not that they desire to marry. The issue is why they desire to marry. Look at the context here. Their desires, their passions, their desires draw them away from Messiah. They desire to marry. Let's remember, look, who gave marriage? Elohim gave marriage, and it was good. But do you think that you can marry maybe for the wrong reasons? Paul explains himself, having abandoned their former faith. And then what happens? They marry and they learn to be idle, going from house to house, and now they're usurping and meddling other family units. They gossip, so they slander, busybodies, meddling with others, saying what they should not. What are these younger widows, once they marry again, what are they not doing? What have we just been covering? They are not doing their toil. They are not working out their own salvation with fear and trembling. They're not doing the toil that was given to them for their own benefit. And as a result, they do not overcome. And as a result, their hearts remain the same. This is why Paul's having the issue here. It's why are they wanting to marry? Look, let me say, let's be blunt. Are they marrying so that they don't have to work? Do they think that, oh, I'm married now, I can just be a woman of leisure and put my feet up and do absolutely nothing. I'm not going to be a helpmeet to my husband. I'm not going to help him raise his children if there's children from a previous marriage. I'm not going to help him. Do you see what I mean? I believe that what Paul is addressing here is people wanting to get married so that they can be lazy and just ride on the coattails of their husbands. As a result, they don't toil. And the outcome from not toiling, well, what else are you going to do instead of twiddling your thumbs all day? You end up inserting yourself into you end up usurping other family units. Look, I'm going to be blunt here, but I've seen this especially in the Messianic body, women wanting to marry for all the wrong reasons. Look, even in Rome, it happens. It's just a human attribute. Do not use what is set apart and pure, i.e. marriage, as an excuse to not do your toil. Because if not, you will suffer. Other people will suffer because you're going about from house to house, and your husband will suffer because you're not being a helpmeet to him. This goes back to what is a woman's role in a marriage. So, this is Paul speaking. I would have that the younger widows marry. So the issue, again, it's not marriage, but look at the difference here, that they bear children and manage their households and give the adversary no occasion for slander. So the issue is not marrying. The issue is what is he saying of these younger widows to do? To bear children and manage their households. Oh, it goes back to the toiling that was given at the fall of man for our benefit. So in context, the issue is not desiring to marry. The issue is, why do you want to marry? Because look, ladies, if you're marrying so that you can be a layabout, as Paul said earlier, you're worse than the unbeliever and have abandoned the faith. Why? Because you're not doing the toil. But again, I'm not just picking on the ladies here. Men, you've got your own version of toil to do. What Paul is saying here is not the issue of marriage. What Paul is saying, focus on your toil. Work out your own salvation. Because when you're doing that, you're not going to become a busybody. And then there's no slander going on because you're not bringing the word of Elohim to disrepute. For some have already strayed after Satan, the adversary. What will help these younger widows is to do their allotted toil. And they may need the help of older women to do this, as per Titus. Look, I'm going to pick on men and women here. If you're not doing your toil, do not be surprised that you have no peace within you. Do not be surprised if you start feeling depressed. Do not be surprised if you start having a very low self-esteem and you start falling into self-condemnation. Justify away all your reasons. And do not be surprised that you start to play the victim and blame everything and everyone for why your life is so messed up. I'm sorry to speak so bluntly, but it's time that we need to look. This is what's going on in Rome right now. Like, the statistics do not lie. And so how are we going to be a light? The first place, I believe, let's start toiling physically, emotionally, spiritually, so that we may eat physical bread, so that our character may be refined, so that we can then eat of the bread of life of the word and ultimately eat of the tree of life. Let's remember that eating of the tree of life is not given to the believer. It's given to he who overcomes will get to eat of the tree of life. Go read Revelation. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church or the assembly not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. And so again, this is why this is going back to what we read earlier. There are those who are truly widows. that through no fault of their own, in physical hardship and destitute. And all they have is Elohim to rely on. So what's being used as the proxy to help these people is the assembly. But there are single widowed women that actually, they're okay. They have physical good. They just need spiritual headship. And we've gone through earlier parts as to how that occurs. And we'll cover this more when Curtis does the discipleship series. Just as an interesting, I haven't got time to dwell on this, but if you read verse 16 in different translations, it will say that if any believing man or woman has relatives who are widows, let them take care. What's really interesting is that pretty much all the early manuscripts actually have any believing woman, which is what you read here. And I think this is really interesting because are we getting an insight that as we got further away from when these words were actually given, that this, dare I say, agenda regarding the design of men and women started to creep into the body? And so it's like, oh, you're not being inclusive. You're not being inclusive. Let's bring the men and the women. All the early manuscripts actually say a believing woman has relatives who are widows. Let her take care of them. And I believe you're being given an insight here actually as to how, again, going back to how were the younger women or the widows supposed to get help? Through the older women. I actually believe that you've got this verse 16 as it's rendered here is the correct rendering, and it's actually upholding the design of men and women as given in Scripture. Whole discussion there. But this discussion will be discussed again in the discipleship series, at least the principles behind it, when Curtis does discipleship series after the Timothy series. Just thought that that's a really interesting point worth mentioning. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. So this is this word again, presbyteros, which we saw at the start of the chapter. We can clearly see from the context here that this is elders within an authority level, not just aged. But notice that it's the elders who rule well that are to be considered of worthy of double honor. Not just, oh, I'm an elder. It's if you rule well. Okay, both in your household and in the assembly of Elohim. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages. And so again, this is where Paul would say in other places, is it such a terrible thing that those who serve should have some physical gain when you have had spiritual gain? Do not admit a charge against an elder, again, presbyteros, and the context here is the elders who rule, okay? So this is actually those that serve within the body, okay? It says, do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay? As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. Okay? So, first of all, look, there's always going to be those in the body that have got something to say against those who serve. Welcome to the job. And so the issue, you're going to get this all the time, because look, elders are going to offend people. Elders are going to have to make decisions that others are just not happy about. It comes with the territory. But again, what is here, the context, this is within eldership actually. And so if you start getting 2, 3, 4 witnesses against a particular elder, then that would require those he's accountable to maybe lead a bit of an investigation as per Torah, right? That those in authority are to diligently seek to see if a matter is so. Now, here it says, as for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all so that the rest may stand in fear. First of all, let's address that there's a huge difference between erring or making the occasional mistake and someone that's persisting in sin, right? We all make mistakes, even at eldership level. Hopefully, we should be making less mistakes the more we grow and wisen up. But there's a like the what the Greek is getting at here is someone that is persisting in sin, which means that there's actually it's hinting at a stubbornness that's going on here. There's actually think Balaam and the donkey story. He kept persisting and pushing and being headstrong and wouldn't take no for an answer. This is kind of what's being addressed here. Now, I've put here the context defines what in the presence of all means. This is not saying that once you have someone that's being found to persist in sin, now you lead them out and march them out in front of the assembly and you string them up for everybody to see and hurl rocks and throw rotten fruit at them and you make a big show and tell about it. That's not what it's saying. What is the context? Elders. Elders. If an elder persists in sin, rebuke them in the presence of the other elders. Look, if someone has to be taken out of eldership, you don't need to hang their dirty laundry in front of a whole community. And all you need to say is like hypothetically speaking, if we had an elder go rogue, let's say, we would say to the community, look, we've had to remove this person from eldership and leave it at that. We're not going to sit there shaming them, taking away their dignity. The fact that we're having to do that says enough. Okay, something happened. The eldership has dealt with it. But unfortunately, this is more prevalent in Christianity. They really take this verse out of context. You need to put them up in front of the congregation and air all their dirty laundry so everyone can point at them and feel self-righteous at how better they are. It's like, no. When there's an issue within eldership, you will warn the other elders. You will do this in an accountable fashion without stripping dignity. This is why, if there's ever issues that go on in the eldership, we won't have a parade of the quote-unquote sinners. But there is a duty of this person is no longer in a serving capacity. We'll leave it at that. That should be enough to instill a bit of a healthy dose of fear and reverence. In the presence of Elohim and of Messiah Yeshua and of the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging, doing nothing from partiality. Again, honor the Torah. This is not showing partiality, is a Torah command. And so I want to just show a very basic diagram of what structure in the body looks like. Because we've seen in a couple of the parts now, these things, servant leaders, deacons, elders, okay? So we're going to start here with the Apostle Paul. Paul was an overseer, an episcope, as we saw. Now, he's an overseer over Timothy and over Titus. We know that because we have the books of Timothy and Titus to show us as such, where Paul is serving and giving them instruction. This is how you ought to go about things, okay? And so Paul is an overseer, an episcope over Timothy and Titus. But he's also a deacon. Why do I say that? Because remember that the word diakonos, all it means is someone that enacts the orders of someone, or he enacts actions on behalf of someone else. And you get this really interesting passage where the Apostle Paul, in Acts chapter 15, goes to the Jerusalem council. Does he not? And he submits himself to the Jerusalem council. And so we have a Jerusalem council and the episcope or overseer of the Jerusalem council is Yaakov, James. And so Paul is having this issue with believing Pharisees over circumcision. They cannot agree. So what do? They go to the council at Jerusalem, and you read Acts chapter 15. The letters go out, and Paul enacts this. Paul is sent out carrying the letter from Yaakov or from James. This is how we're to go about things in the assembly. And so while Paul is an overseer over Timothy and Titus, he's also a deacon in that he enacted the counsel that was given by the Jerusalem council. Now, Paul was over Timothy and Titus. We know that Timothy and Titus were overseers over their respective assemblies, especially in Asia Minor. However, there were deacons as well. Why? Because they're taking on board the instruction from the Apostle Paul, which in turn would have come from the Council of Jerusalem. So they're acting in both office of overseer and deacon. Because again, a deacon is simple. It's not the guy meet and greet at the front of the door or the tea caddy. He's someone that enacts the actions and orders of someone above him, of the authority and accountability that's over him. Now, we know that Timothy and Titus were themselves over assemblies. In fact, Paul would say to Titus, go and appoint elders in all the cities, right? So Timothy and Titus were overseers and deacons, and those assemblies would have had overseers, elders, and deacons as well. Okay, this is not you're either one or the other. Like it's like the gifts of ministry. You're not just a prophet or a teacher or an evangelist. You should be in time growing in all these offices, right? It's the same with overseer, elder, deacon. Like, look, I'm an overseer. I am an episcope. You could argue that I'm also an elder, presbyteros, because I serve as an eldership within the wider community. But I have authority above me. I have authority above me. I take accountability from those that have gone before me. So in that sense, I'm a deacon, right? It's function as opposed to title. Think of it as function as opposed to title. Now notice that the way that this is set up, there is accountability at every level. Every level, there's accountability. The assembly is accountable to the elders, deacons, and overseers within it, but also to Timothy or to Titus, who's also accountable to Paul, who's also accountable to the Jerusalem council. Even Yaakov, James, is accountable to the other apostles, but he's just overseeing it. There's accountability at every level. And I've put here in the note, this is parallel to the structure of the house of Israel in the wilderness. You had Moshe and Aaron, right? You had the 70 elders, which you could argue were leaders of thousands, which would have then been leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, leaders of 10. And the beauty of doing it this way is that you're always accountable to no more than 10 to 12 men at any point. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Yeshua, 12 disciples. Interesting. It means that at every stage or every level of accountability, it's because you're only dealing with about 12 men at any point. It means that it retains the intimacy that is required to deal with issues at that level. Again, we'll get more into this in the discipleship series. Right, let's finish up on this final bit of the passage. Do not be hasting the laying on of hands. So we addressed the laying on of hands last week. We understand that this is not magic hocus pocus. This is a process, and this is an outward expression of a discipleship process that's already occurred. This passage will make a lot more sense now that we understand what the laying on of hands is from the previous part. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. The sin of some people are conspicuous, they're obvious, going before them to judgment, but the sins of others appear later. And as we covered last week, actually, let's finish here. So also good works are conspicuous, and even those that are not cannot remain hidden. We covered last week that Paul is saying, Timothy, be wise on to who you start laying hands on, because it may bite you later on. Because some people are very good at saying the right things and put it on the brave face. And if you're not going to use the prophetic ability of discerning someone and testing them over time and playing the long game with them, you may start getting involved with someone and biting you later on. Okay, so we covered that last week. Notice how this command, this statement to Timothy, verse 23, is sandwiched in between, don't be hasty in the laying on of hands. By the way, why? Because the sins of others appear later. And as a result of that, you may bring unnecessary pain to yourself. Does this context of verse 23, either side, actually tell us why Timothy had frequent ailments? Do you think that Timothy, I'm going to put something forward here, and this is just my educated guess or, speculation, but I think it holds merit. Why did Timothy have frequent ailments? Had he been hastily laying on of hands on people too quickly? And was he being needed to be reminded, Timothy, remember your frequent ailments and how you got there? Let me remind you, don't hastily lay hands on someone. Why? Because the sins of others appear later. Look, I believe this may be so because yours truly has been guilty of this in the past as well. You lay hands on someone too quickly. You get into an intimate discipleship process, maybe a bit too hastily. You may even put someone forth as a servant leader too quickly without doing the long game. And then the fruit that comes from that ends up weighing you down. And could it have gotten to such a point for Timothy that it actually started to affect his physical health? I don't know, but that's where my leaning goes. So let's stop here. Let's remember why I titled today's teaching what it was: working as a body. Working as a body. These instructions are given to us not to make our lives difficult. On the contrary, they're there to give us life. They're there because our Creator is love and wants the best for his people. Amen.